So you've just been introduced to Pat, the Director of Onondaga Community Living, OCL, in Syracuse, New York. Pat's organisation began as a traditional provider of group-based services, and this agency then transformed itself from one of predetermined outcomes to that of listening to its people and readapting its purpose, mission and strategy, and now follows each person in the pathway that they wish to take, and they've disbanded all of their services that they originally operated. OCL began this transition before any other agency in their state. There was no map or how-to book. Each step had to be carefully thought through, along with the impact on the people using the services, on the agency and on the government that supported them. So the title of this presentation is What Does It Take to Create Organisational Change? And Pat's going to take you through what was learned from making the change from providing traditional services to services centred around each person. Thank you, Pat.
I'll do a little bit about our agency, obviously. I'm not going to talk a lot about our agency per se. What I want to do is talk more broadly about what it takes to make organizational change. And this is just a picture of a bunch of us at a retreat. And I think this is what it takes to make organizational change. It takes all those people to do that. And this is just a lot of good souls that happen to land at OCL. That it's people we support, it's families, it's staff. So it's a good group. So I'm going to start with traditional services, traditional lives. I'm going to be kind of negative about this, but the reality is services were developed for a variety of reasons. Parents want something, so they came to an organization and said, we want this for our sons and daughters. A lot of times there's funding that happens, and so, organizations get some sort of funding package. It's like, well, cool, let's do this. Or the board could sit around and say, well, we did a community study and it looks like, we should do whatever it is that we should do. So they develop for all kinds of different reasons, and they're not bad reasons, none of them. They all have humanitarian goals. Nobody says, we're here to torture the people that we serve, or let's develop a wasteful program for people. Nobody ever says that, okay? So they all got good reasons behind them. But what happens is that you get a systemization of services. I'll give you an example, and this was years and years and years ago, but there was a four-person option that was new in our state. This is when there was a lot of bigger group homes. And there was a conference I was at, and there was a director from another agency, and he was there talking about these four families that came to him. And these four families all had sons and daughters, and the four families all knew each other, the sons and daughters all knew each other. And so what they wanted to do is have this organization develop a home for their sons and daughters. So it sounded wonderful. Just like these four families, they all knew each other, the sons and daughters knew each other, whatever. So fine, so the agency put this together. The families decided on a home. The families helped to set up the house. Their sons and daughters all moved in together. So which was different than how typical group homes were set up, where the house was found and people were found later to move into an existing home. So he's up there talking about this nice little arrangement, and it may not be perfect, but at that time, it was intriguing to a lot of different agencies. So a lot of agencies got in their mind, well, let's do four-person arrangements. So what happened is that the state started getting inundated with projects that were four-person arrangements. So what happens is that as more and more of these four-person arrangements began, there was a systemization of services. And organizations began to get, embodied into formalized, regulations, programs, whatever. So that nice little house that was set up for whatever, those four people needed, where they figured out the staffing, they figured out whatever it needed, that kind of all went by the wayside, because when you get more and more and more and more of the same sort of thing developing, it's up to the government then to regulate it, to monitor it, to come up with guidelines for it, all of those sorts of things. So what happens is that, going back to those humanitarian goals up here, some of that gets masked at that point. And you can bet if there was somebody there was a fire in one of those 4-person houses, you can imagine that all the 4-person houses are now going to have more fire regulations. So it's just, that's what happens when systems begin to take over a service. So what happens is a lot of times is you get a lot of professional growth and accountability. And if you're not careful, that professional growth and accountability just overwhelms, what you're doing. And you're more about the growth, we need more money in our budgets, or the accountability, we've got, certification people coming next week, we got to have our books in order. You pay more attention to that thing than you are paying attention to the lives of the people that you're actually working for. So what happens through all of this is because we're part of a system. Initial benefits begin to fade. All those nice things that moms and dads wanted, all those dreams that they had, it's not that they're in a bad location or it's a bad place, but the reality is, a lot of things begin to fade because the focus is no longer on the son or daughter, it's on something else. So funding and rules really begin to take precedent. And I would assume Australia, maybe New York State is probably far more weird than Australia, but we have more and more corporate compliance and HIPAA regulations. I mean, we just have more and more and more compliance stuff that we have to pay attention to and that we're forced to pay attention to, and if we don't pay attention to it, we get fined for it, And what does this have to do about the lives of people that we support? So funding and rules begin to take precedence. So that what happens is that you begin to get very dysfunctional practices. And those dysfunctional practices then become normalized. And so, I've heard people, I've even heard people in our agency say, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, who came up with that rule? It's like, you don't always have to do things a certain way. It's like, let's just figure out what is dysfunctional within our agency. Let's not take the easy road and say, well, we always did it that way. Well, guess what? We need to do it a different way now. That sort of thing. So what you get is an industrial-like system, and then the people we serve actually become the raw material that fuel that human service wheel. And so you get a slot, a vacancy, you go, the system is trying to find the next warm body that can move into it, regardless, really, of what that person truly needs. I sit on a lot of committees. I have governor's appointments to a couple of things, and one of the, committees it's a council, actually, government council, and it's called the Most Integrated Supports and Services Council. And what it is, it's based on a law, which is the Olmstead Law, which was a lawsuit in New York, lawsuit in United States. And it talks about all people, regardless of age or disability, to have the most integrated lifestyle. So I'm a public appointment to this, and I sit there with all these big heads of all the different departments, so all the commissioner level peoples of all these departments. And there was a discussion that we were having about assessments at one point. And the assessment piece of it is interesting to me because, all of us run whatever service that we run. And all of us need to find people that can fit into whatever that service type is that we run. So what tends to happen is people assess for the service type. If you have a vacancy in a particular program type, you're usually assessing for what that program type has to offer. Can you meet the program type's needs? Okay? And I raised my hand because I'm always vocal with these guys. And I said, that's interesting, but I think, because of this Olmstead Law, it's a class action lawsuit, and we're obviously not doing what we're supposed to be doing in New York State. Wouldn't it make better sense that we assess for what a person wants versus what a program wants? And this one woman, she raises her hand and she says, but then they won't fit in my silos. It's like bingo. Maybe your silos aren't meeting people's needs. But she's doing this thing. She's running a program type where people are part of the human service wheel, that are really not paying attention to really what the humanitarian goals were that were originally set up. Yep, go ahead. Well, I think it's because people don't have good leadership. I mean, if you have good leadership and good values, you can work through most of this stuff. And I'm not saying we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but at least we're focused on what we're trying to accomplish for people, you know? And then when it's not that, and we're not an agency that does not pay attention to laws or regulations, we do. But there's always the spirit of the law, the spirit of the regulation, you know? And so, and I always use colors, you know, like if I said, you know, the regulation says everyone has to wear black, okay? There's black in this plaid black. You know, there's a black coat over there that's solid. There's a plaid black back there. There's, you know, black, you know, there's a colorful black over there. The point is, there's a million different ways to have black. You know, and that's what the regulation says, have black. You know, but most people say it's dark, solid black, you know, and then they get stuck in that dark, solid black. Well, no, I have plaid black, and I'm okay because I meet in regulation. You know, and so that's, I think, you know, the people who defer to government for the answers will always say they're stuck. People who can think for themselves and still comply with government will never be stuck, you know, because they'll figure out ways around things. And I think that's some of the key. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's some of the key behind what it is. All right, and so basically what I'm saying is the progressiveness in the past becomes very antiquated, you know, so. So offers to existing people to make changes. My experience is when you begin to make a change, you're going to have a lot of people internally that will see people as not being ready to be more of what they term to be more independent. You know, they're not ready. Or people themselves may say, I'm not ready, okay? So people are not typically seen as ready or skilled enough to move to whatever that different level of unknownness is. Okay, so it's kind of like you got to go through, in New York State, there was a continuum. You go from one piece of the continuum to the next piece of continuum. You graduate to the next step, okay? So when you're doing like an individualized support, there's no graduation. You know, you just do the support. But, you know, the thing is, most people are too scared to make that step because, oh my God, you know, he can't shower by himself, or oh my God, he doesn't know money, or oh my God, he has behavior problems. You know, the list goes on and on and on and on. So many times staff and families, and I use the word are not ready, but they're maybe not open-minded, and I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but families, what I find, they only know what the system has taught them. You know, families have not been allowed to really dream about stuff. The system said you can have this, 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 or this. And so families have learned that that's all I can ask for. So a lot of times in staff, like your point a minute ago, staff only know what they've been told. You know, they don't know that they can think beyond something. You know, and so many times the staff and families are not ready to make a systems change, whatever that systems change is, because they don't know what it is. They don't know what could happen. They're worried. They're worried about, you know, whatever vulnerability they can think of. So what happens is that excuses mount, okay? There's personal care, there's lack of skills, there's behavioral issues, there's ongoing support needs. There's excuse after excuse after excuse on why the person has to stay trapped in something that's not working for them, okay? And then people often need to go on the wait list to go to the next step. You know, and I've worked in the system where you graduate from one residential program to the next residential program. You change your address, you move to whatever that is. You graduate from one day program to, you graduate to a different address to another day program. You know, so people within a traditional system often have to wait, you know, until they're skilled enough to move on to the next step. So, and I don't mean to be negative, so I'm too depressing, but this is just how my take on life, okay? So you can disagree with me, but okay, so if you want to have a change in mindset and you want to serve people and not systems, what you need to start to do is to offer nothing. You know, because when you start offering something, you've given an answer. You know, it's like you can have this or this. Well, maybe that or that didn't work. So you got to start with a blank slate. You know, if someone's coming to try to figure out what they want to do with their day, you need to figure out what they want to do with their day, not what you think they should be doing with their day. If someone's looking for some sort of a home or lifestyle, it's like, it's not about my lifestyle, my home, or my thought about what it is. It needs to be about what you think it is. So that offering nothing, I think, is an important piece, and it's very, very hard for organizations to do. Did you have a question? No, okay. All right, so families, like I said, they've learned to ask for what the system's asked for, or what is offered. Different questions need to be posed. You know, I remember early on when some families came, they came to me and they were talking funding streams. I think my son or daughter would be good with, and then they would say a funding stream. Supervised apartments, foster care, whatever the funding stream was. And I'm going, you know, I know funding, but I just don't have a picture of what you're talking about. You know, I'm more interested in what neighborhood are you talking about, what kind of home, you know, what kinds of people does your son or daughter like to live with? You know, what connections does your son or daughter have? You know, are they part of a church? Are they working somewhere? You know, what is it that's going on in your son or daughter's life that we need to preserve, first of all? And then that can help us say where we want to help someone to live or work or whatever it is. So different questions need to be asked instead of people coming in and saying, well, we've got a vacancy, and like Eric, you know, the offer to the family was, we have a vacancy in a 4-person arrangement, you know, in the city. I mean, that was what's being offered. That's not what Mom said. Mom says the country, Mom says cool guys, Mom says a lot of things, but what the agency offered was, you know, what they had available. So it's about different questions needing to be asked, and it's, I think I'd probably say, learning to listen differently. You know, because when I sat in that room, I heard something entirely different than what that other agency director heard. The agency director heard, I've got a family in need, I've got programs, I know how to work with people with autism, I can help them. And I heard Mom say, you know, she has a dream, she's dying, she wants normal stuff for her son. I've never met the son in my life, but I thought, my God, why can't that happen? Why can't that happen? You know, and so, but learning to listen differently, that's two people hearing the same exact thing and taking it in two entirely different directions. So. And then learning to stretch the boundaries, I'll just go back to that story again. I mean, she pounded her fist on the table. She was yelling at me, red face, saying, we don't do this. Do you realize how vulnerable this person is? You've never met this person. Da, da, da. She's just rambling on. It's like, well, okay. You know, it's just a thought that I had. Just listen to Mom. You know, but Mom then finally says, you know, clutching herself to my leg as we're leaving the room, let's talk more. You know, let's talk. And I mean, and still is a very vulnerable man. But that's not to say that we can't stretch the boundaries beyond what was comfortable to whatever that organization was. Let's see. And then what organizational change is talking about is learning to walk down new and different paths. And like my introduction said, We started this organizational change back in the early 90s. And it was at a time when there was very, very, very traditional funding. There was no special funding to do anything unique or individual. And I'll tell you, if we had waited for the unique and individual to come along, we would have still been waiting. It's just, you gotta work with the deck of cards that you're dealt, you know. And if you can work with that deck of cards, most regulations, most laws or whatever, they don't say people will live impoverished lives. They don't say people will have wasted lives. They don't say people will be overprotected, over-controlled. They don't say any of those things. But the reality is a lot of people are involved in situations that are all those things. You know, so as you're making a change, I would just encourage people to focus on a person. Just focus on a person. And that person will tell you what direction you need to go. And I wouldn't focus on a program type. I'm trying to figure out what I said when, but this was yesterday I was talking. But we get accused of closing group homes. We never closed a group home. We allowed people to decide on where they wanted to live, and they all moved out, and then we sold the house. I mean, that's a different thing. You know, because if we had said we're closing a group home, that would have meant all of you are moving, whether you're ready, willing, able, or interested. But that's not what we did. We listened to people, and then as we listened to people, people began to move. We didn't fill the vacancies. Eventually there was nobody there, and we had to sell the house. You know, so, but that was learning how to walk down different paths, and we just didn't know what we were doing. We clearly didn't know what we were doing. So what happens is that people will come asking for something atypical, and I'm just picking a few people that we have, but I mean, I was at a workshop, training, a couple years ago, and they do have some individualized funding, you know, in our state, and so you can be one of these individualized funding agencies or whatever. So some of the agencies, you know, jumped on new funding stream, give me some slots, I'll do it, you know, that sort of thing. So I'm listening to this group talk, okay, and, you know, some of them have started to do some nice things, which is wonderful, and I applaud what people are doing, but there's one that stuck out for me, and she said, well, we're waiting for our first person. It's like, you're serving like 1,000 people. You can't tell me you don't have somebody internally that's interested in changing their life. But they're not interested in changing their programs. They're interested in developing a new program, which means you have to have new people to come in to have the new program. So they're missing the whole point of what this whole thing is about. So what happens is that you have different people, different needs, different lives, different communities, different service structures, and different methods of support. And I can't say that enough, you know, because early on when we first started doing or helping people to kind of figure out different lives, what happened is that I was sending things off to our state capital, which is Albany, because I think I said before, the local limit was $23,000, you know, so we could get $23,000 locally without having to go anyplace, but most people cost more than $23,000. You know, so that meant even if they cost $32,000, I had to go to our state capital. So what happened is that a lot of these people, I had budgets in on, and at that time they all got stuck. They got totally stuck at our state office. And the reason they got stuck was because I talked about those four-person arrangements. There was lots of those four-person arrangements coming in at that time. So they had figured out how many staff it took to do that, you know, what kind of, what kind of medical support they needed, whatever. They had come up with their parameters on all this. So they were understanding how to do these four-pack models. but they didn't know how to do the one-pack model, okay? And the problem with the one-pack model that we had is that we had actually helped this guy in the red hat, that guy, he came out of a forensic center, okay? So he had tried several places in our community, been kicked out of most of them, set fire to a couple, assaulted staff and a few others, and was sent off to the institution. He failed our institution, which I don't understand how you fail an institution, but anyway, he failed that and was sent to the forensic center. And that's where I met him, was in the forensic center. So we had his service, figured out in whatever way it was figured out. So that was over at Albany. And then we also had, somebody living home with mom. Had a lot of support needs. But what she needed was somebody that was more her son's age, could help with the personal care, those sorts of things, but still live at home with mom. So we had that in. We had actually Ron's situation. I talked about Ron this morning. The house was left in trust for him. So we had a whole bunch of different situations. There was a handful. And they got stuck there, The neat thing, though, is they were all very, very different. And it's because all their stories are very, very different. And all their support needs were very, very different. And so what I did is I actually had families start calling our state government, because there's only so much I can do as an executive director. So I figured, it's like, here's the phone numbers. And if they came to town for a meeting, I'd say, let me introduce you to the head of revenue management, that sort of thing. So families started, contacting some of these guys, which it was good. At least they were on the radar screen now. So the government guys finally invited me to come to meet with them. So I come and meet with them. They're all, I hate to stereotype people, but they're all guys in suits, And here I am, just me. And they all have their stacks of budgets and, their revenue management, It's not like I didn't have budgets with me or anything, but I was not there to quibble dollars. I was there to help them understand what these people all needed. And what they were saying is that the reason it got stuck is because they were trying to figure out what, it's called FTE, what the full-time equivalent is for a one-person arrangement. And I said, I don't know what it is, because they're all different. That's what a one-person arrangement is. It's different than the other one-person arrangement. They were very happy by the time I left. I never opened budgets. I never talked with them about anything, dollar-wise or anything. I knew what I could negotiate and couldn't negotiate on behalf of each one of these situations. And they were very impressed because they always just sit and look at money, And also what I had done is I started schmoozing them. I like to make chocolates. So I made chocolates and dropped them off. I brought them off with donuts sometimes when I was there. I've just figured, I'm just going to be on your radar screen, that sort of thing. But when we finally got done with that meeting, it was probably 2 weeks later, every single one of those budgets got kicked out at the exact dollar amount that we requested. And it's because they didn't know what to do, and they were trusting what we were doing, which we were doing, I think at that point we were doing it pretty well. We were solid in understanding what the family or the person wanted. We were not asking for more than what we need. We're using a lot of unpaid sports in people's lives, and so it's a cost-effective option, and then the forensic center guy was way cost-effective, so when you start bringing people together and helping to figure out who's not happy in your organization, that might be a good place to start. You'll find that people will all have different tales, yeah. Okay, what happened was we had one of our own calling for help. And this was Paul. He is right there. That's Paul. And I told you about him a little bit before. He was the guy that his father was a contractor. And this is Roger, who actually is a contractor. And they lived together. And it was Debbie here that really helped Paul to kind of move on his life in some positive ways. So she was the champion in his life. But Paul was, when I first came there, he was not a happy camper. He had just gotten fired from a job. He had, and some of you may have heard me tell the story before, but he was working at a local grocery store. Right next to it was a fire station, and he used to leave the grocery store, go to the fire station, hang out with the fire station guys, get dragged back to the grocery store. Then he'd go back to the fire station, hang out with the fire station guys, get dragged back to the grocery store. And he finally went over there one too many times, and they finally said, "You're done." So when he went home, he kind of went crazy because he's a working man. He will say that, "I'm a working man." You know, and for him to lose a job was hard for him. Plus, he lost the fire station that was right next door to it. You know, so he lost a lot. But Debbie, she said, "Why can't we help him get a fire station?" You know, when I was there, first day I was there, he got fired. The handy-dandy psychiatrist gave him more handy-dandy psychiatric medications. Handy-dandy behaviorist gave staff some handy-dandy physical restraints. I mean, it was horrendous what was happening. And it's all because people weren't understanding him, you know? So Debbie said, "What if I could find him a place at a fire station?" It's like, well, life can't get any worse, you know? So lo and behold, she finds not the same fire station, but one that was closer to where he lived. And he got accepted at the fire station. He begins going to the fire station. The fire guys are accepting him. He didn't change overnight, and he's got a mouth on him. He taught me more swear words than anybody I know. But when he's mad, and he hurts himself, he hurts other people. He's very dangerous. And what happened was that he didn't hurt anybody, but he can scream and rate 2 inches from your face. And he started doing that at the fire station. And the nice thing that happened at the fire station was the guys screamed back at him. And it was probably the first time anybody had stood up to him in that way. That's a nice thing community people can do that we as staff can't. You know, because if I scream at him like that, I'm going to get written up on abuse or something. But the fire station can do it. They didn't hurt him. They set a line, just said, "You act like a jerk, you're not coming here again." You know, and it's like, and Paul stood back. And from that, things started to change. You know, so eventually what happened is that, you know, we actually hired somebody to come in to do some planning for this guy because he was very complicated. Mom was already making referrals to other group homes in the community, thinking she called him a brat. He's just being a brat. You know, the directors of other agencies are calling me, said, you know, "Do you know that Mom's doing this?" I said, "I'm not surprised, but I don't think that's the answer." You know, so we hired somebody to come in, do some planning, and it's a very long story, but what happened was it ended up that he did not want to live with sick people, and he considered anybody who took medications as sick. And some of the people that we supported at their house took medications. He did not want to have any staff in his life because staff had always controlled him, managed him, whatever. He wanted no staff in his life. And the fire station actually came to this planning session. And the room, you wouldn't believe how much the room changes when you have, I don't even remember how many, 15 firefighters in the room with you. You know, because they saw Paul as Paul. They did not see him as a client of a system. You know, they saw him as a pain in the butt, you know, but you know, still they saw Paul as Paul. But anyhow, so it ended up that Mom thought he would move back to the home community, which was way over here, where his group home was way over there, which is a whole another story in itself. But then the fire station was over there. But when she came to this planning meeting, she said, "Paul has relationships now. He needs to go where his relationships are." So they ended up deciding that he would live in the town of Manlius, which was way over here. You know, so, and we're used to being a residential provider right now. This was actually the first person that transitioned out of our group homes. we're used to finding the home, finding the apartment, da-da-da-da-da. Well, the fire station starts looking for the apartment. The fire station starts thinking about who's going to live with Paul, which was really interesting to sit back as a service provider and watch a bunch of these community people just take control over things. And we also got together for several months later because he had a lot of vulnerabilities, and we were trying to sort out how we could safeguard some of those. And a lot of those were about him being clientized the rest of his life, him being highly medicated the rest of his life, him being a nuisance to the community the rest of his life. These were real life defining things that we had to kind of figure out. But he eventually moved. He moved in on, this is really nice, he moved to a street called Pleasant Street. It was a couple houses down from Mike and Nancy, who we knew at the fire station. It was across the street from a friend of Mike's and Nancy's who owned a restaurant. He started working at that restaurant. Roger answered the ad about living there rent-free in return for companionship and safety. He moved in, and he's been there ever since. He's never moved. Paul still has his ups and downs. And he has a lot of very high ups and very high downs. But the important thing is I think this group is really standing together. But Paul has been one of the greatest teachers that our agency has ever had. And he continues to teach us a lot on a day-by-day basis just because he's not the easiest person in the world. But anyhow, you need to keep your eye on the compass. I always give the story that I'm a pilot, because I am. But if I want to go somewhere with my plane, I have to have a compass heading in order to get there. You know, and if I don't have that compass heading, then I could be flying around in circles, and I may not ever arrive at the destination that I want to be at. You know, so, but when I fly, you know, I could have weather in the way. I have to divert around. I could have a mechanical problem. I have to land and get fixed. I could go into another territory, another country, whatever, has different rules. I mean, there's lots of things that could happen. But if I don't get back in that plane and figure out my compass heading and keep going, I will never, ever get to where I need to go. Why I say that with the human service stuff is that I don't think that, at least I can talk about me, you know, years ago when I used to do traditional services, I don't think I ever had a compass heading on behalf of the people that we supported. You know, I had a compass heading on what the program type was, but not what people's lives should be like, okay? You know, and so as I do this work now in individualized supports, I realize the importance of the heading that each person has and wants to take. And everybody's heading is going to be a little bit different than someone else's, but if I don't understand that person's heading, I'm never going to be able to help them get to where they need to go. You know, so I think the piloting skills I have has really helped me focus better in terms of really what needs to happen in terms of people. When you're also doing this work, you really got to look at what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Have you learned that documentation is an important process in terms of the change? Has it been useful, and is it something that you've been able to assist other organisations do?
I believe documentation is important for a couple of different reasons. One, we are regulated by the federal government, so we need to have documentation in order to keep our funding secure, okay? But that's not the reason that we're doing the documentation. The documentation is important for the person's life, and it should be a chronological display of whatever's happening in a person's life so that when the next staff person comes in, he or she can have a good understanding of what it is that they're, you know, working on and towards and that sort of thing. When I move back even farther, we have to do plans. They're called ISPs, individual service plans, where it's mandated. And we do that every 6 months for each person. Now, the state has regulations. You have to do individual service plans every 6 months. The state has recommended forms, although they're not in regulation that you have to use this form. What we did is, I sat down with the staff, and this was years ago, but we sat down together and we just put the forms away, and we just said, we're just going to put on big paper on a wall what's important in each of our lives. Let's think through this. You know, so people started putting up the parameters of what was important: family, friends, relationships, work, health. They just kept putting down things. What happened through that was there was nothing about behavior. There was nothing about ADL skills. There was nothing about goals. There was nothing about those things. Not that we don't touch on and work on a lot of those things, but what happens is that the plan, the ISP plan now, is focused on more fundamentally what is important in someone's life. Where, at least in our state, the ISP form is more, you know, write down your 4 goals, whatever it is. You know, it's more rudimentary in terms of what you do for somebody. So I think that, you know, going through that exercise with staff helps staff to change their mindsets on what it was that makes sense, you know, to look at. And now that form's been around for 100 years. I don't know exactly when we did it, but, you know, everybody is trained in on that form now, so that's just the way they do the form. You know, they don't even think about those other things any longer. So I think paperwork is very important. But I also think that if you go back to the original stuff where I talked about why systems are set up, you know, sometimes what happens is that organizations defer to the government to say, what is it do I need to fill out? You know, and the government will always tell you what to fill out. And the government's not bad. They're not bad people, but they don't understand the value system behind what you're trying to accomplish. You know, and so I think it's better to figure out, if you got to do a daily note form, figure out what the regulations say about the daily note form, but then figure out a daily note form that will get the information that you need on behalf of that person versus meeting the regulation. You know, that sort of thing. Okay? All right. There's a lot of risk planning and risk-taking sorts of things going on. You know, so anytime you make a change, it's risky. It's very risky. You don't know where you're going to land in the long run, but if you don't take the risk, you're never going to find out. And a lot of people are just worried about unpaid people, worried about, you know, more independence. Mom sitting up here worried about her son, you know, living independently. You know, everybody's worried, and everybody should be. I'm not going to say don't worry, you know, but if you don't take the step, you will never grow, you know. And I can't stress that enough. There's been so many things that we've done that we just did not know the answers to at all, but it's like, let's try it. Let's see where it lands us, you know, that sort of thing. And we're not being negligent. We didn't do anything stupid. We were thoughtful. But it's like, well, we've never tried this before. You know, let's see where it lands us. And what I would suggest for you to do is plan for things to go wrong, because they always do, you know. I always plan for things to fall apart. And if we plan for things to fall apart, generally we put some safeguards in place, so probably it won't fall apart. You know, so, and I'm always interested in the naysayers in the room, the people that say, oh, she'll never be able to do this. You know, it's like, well, let's be in conversation about that. Let's tell me why it's not going to work. You know, because those people know what we need to worry about. You know, those people know if she has a negative reputation, how she got that negative reputation and how it's going to be perpetuated. So we need to know that stuff. You know, so the naysayers, I used to say, oh, God, you know, it's just like, get out if you don't believe. But now, you know, it's just like we learned very early, the naysayers are very, very positive people, you know, in terms of helping you to really understand what it is that you need to safeguard, what it is that you need to worry about. Once again, I say know the regulations. I mean, if you start moving down a path that's different from what's typically done in your state or your community, you best know the regulations, because that's the easiest thing that could trip you up. You know, somebody said, well, you don't comply with whatever it is, the fire drill, or whatever it is. And they have reason to trip you up at that point because you're not following a regulation. So don't ignore regulations. You can readapt them. You can look at them differently, but don't ignore them. And when people say you're not wearing dark black, just remember that you still have polka dotted black on. You're still in the spirit of the regulation. Not taking no for an answer. We wrote a book, it's called One Person at a Time. I think Crew had some for sale. But anyhow, one of the things I learned from writing that book, because we interviewed a lot of people, was that our agency doesn't take no for an answer. And I never thought about that before. But it's probably true. You know, it's just like, as you're going through change, you know, people might say, well, this regulation doesn't da-da-da-da-da. Well, but the thing is, this is what we're going to do. So you're the expert, you know, so help me think through this. You know, it's like massaging people to help people to understand. So, because too many, and I see it with my co-directors at, in Syracuse, too many times somebody at the state level will say, well, you can't do something. And so they'll all say, okay, we won't do it. And it's like, what do you mean we can't do it? It's like there's nothing that says you can't do stuff. You know, that power of no is so incredible. I mean, it could be a direct service person that says, you can't go to college. I bet you that person will never go to college. That direct service person said they couldn't. It's not the board, it's not the supervisor, it's not the state government, it was that direct service person. You know, and so the power of no can go from the board to the staff to the government to the whoever, you know, and everything stops there. So just don't take no for an answer. There's always a way around it. There is always a way. Yeah.
How do you bring, like, your board along with you with this sort of stuff?
Well, with us, what I did is, well, first of all, they were interested in more personalized options, whatever that was, because I used to do personalized options in whatever their definition was. So they thought we were just going to develop a new program type. As we began to entertain new people coming into the organization, they were excited with what was going on. It didn't change the program at that point. Didn't change it at all. And so they were excited with what was happening and applauding, you know, and it was working regulatory and budget-wise and everything. When it started affecting the group home, what happened is I brought to the board, what are we going to do with the group home? And if I had 12 people in the room, I had 12 different answers. So what I did at that point is, you know, I probably could have talked my way through it, but I don't like to have responsibility on my shoulders. I'm just not a person that likes that at all. So I rather have shared responsibility, consensus. So it may have taken me a long time to get to consensus with just me there. And plus, I'm not the right person to get consensus because I have a belief on what could happen. You know, so I'm very lucky that we have Syracuse University in our community, and Syracuse University tends to attract a lot of good thinking people. So what I did is I started connecting up with people at Syracuse University, and as good thinking people came through, they came over, and they came over for a glass of wine, they came over for coffee in the morning, they came over for a roundtable discussion. Different people came through our agency, all informally, nobody did a presentation. We were all in conversation, you know, about the direction our agency was going. And that helped them because it was at a time when that first group home closed, we had one presentation and it bombed because what happened was that the board asked the presenter how many agencies in New York State have closed group homes, and he said none, which didn't make them feel real confident at that point that we should do this or we would know how to do this or whatever. You know, so as these people came through and as they had discussions, you could feel that the discussions were getting deeper, you know, with different people coming in. And staff came, board members came, families came, you know, different people came. And they didn't have to come either, you know. So we did a summer of that. And then I remember it was September 21st. It was my husband's birthday, I remember. We had a board meeting, and I brought it to the board on what we were going to do, because they applauded that we were going to individualize the services for everybody at the house. They thought that was wonderful. But when it came to what we were going to do with that house, if there were 12 people in the room, 10 people voted that we should rid ourselves of that house. 2 people got up and quit the board at that meeting. They just walked out, because they really felt that it was viable in some way. So and it happened with the staff too. I mean, some people believed, some people didn't. Some people left, some people we fired. When you're going through an organizational change, it's a mindset change. When you're doing a systems change on a state level, which our state is, it's a mindset change. And unless you do the work on holding the values right, you're just going to have another mediocre service, but now in an individualized way. So I can't stress that enough. Okay, so you also need to know when to bend and when to push. And there's lots of times, I'm a very pushy person when I need to be, but I sit very quietly a lot of times too, because it's just not that important. Because if I'm out there yelling all the time, people aren't going to listen to me, that sort of thing. So you need to know what battles you need to fight. And there's been some significant battles that I didn't fight, but there was other bigger battles I needed to fight. So you've got to play the game, and you've got to work with your state government, because you are competing against whatever traditionally has been provided in your state or your community or whatever. So you really got to work with your government. You've got to find those allies into your government. You've got to find those bright eyes in the government. And what I find is that people are intrigued with innovation. They don't know how to do it, but they're intrigued by it. And if you find the right people that have the shine in their eye or whatever, you can bring them along the journey with you. And they're good people to bring along the journey, because they're government and they can help you. They can help massage things for you in different ways. And then, like I said, you need to develop your allies along the way. So early learning was how to assess a person, not a program, okay? The separation from services and housing, how to conduct personalized planning. And what we did originally was we had some people, come in to do planning sessions. I do planning sessions all the time. I've done it lots of different places, but I did not feel I was the right person to do planning sessions in our agency at that time. They needed to have somebody that was neutral coming through. So we did that. What I also did is I picked people that did different types of planning. So we didn't all do essential lifestyle planning. We didn't all do model coherency. We didn't all do, personal futures planning. So I picked different people because of their expertise with different planning tools, maps, path, whatever. So they all came through, and the reason for that is because I didn't want people to get a mindset of this is how you plan. I wanted them to get a mindset of, or how do I want to say that? I didn't want them to get a mindset of, this is the tool that you use to plan, okay? I wanted them to get a mindset of how do you plan? How do you think differently? And by using different techniques and that sort of thing, it helped to broaden people's perspectives on things. And I've talked before about how to apply existing regulations and funding streams to what people are asking for. And that should be pretty easy to do if you think through it. And how to stand tall and firm while still not alienating others. That's a big thing. And more recently, I think I've alienated more people than not, because we're going through another funding dilemma, and I'm constantly in conversation with our government. But it's not to the advantage to alienate anybody, and usually if I find the person, like I'll give you an example. I'm sitting at one of these meetings that I go to in Albany, and this was years ago, and it was the head of revenue management, and he was supposed to be talking about personalized funding options. And he's talking about all this funding that I don't use at all. It's used for traditional program stuff. So, I'm listening to him and everything. So I raised my hand at the end, and I said, in all due respect, we do personalized support, but I we've never used any of those funding mechanisms. So, I think we need to talk about some other ones. Well, at that point, the families of the group were saying, well, Pat doesn't use it or OCL doesn't use it. It's like, what do we need to know with blah, blah, blah. So there's this big hubbub that's going on. And then, sorry, I had to go, and I really did need to go. So I had to go because I had another meeting or something. So I left the room, and they were like in turmoil, at this point. So I'm thinking, and I didn't know this revenue management guy very well. So I thought, it's probably not such a good idea. I started this big argument and then left the room, So what I did is I called him up to see if I could set up an appointment. So I said, this wasn't a good introduction. I said, maybe we need to sit down. So I go there, and I'm very prepared when I need to be. I brought examples of things that I thought he would have questions about. So I brought budgets on things. I brought, planning things. I just brought stuff. So as we're talking, he's beginning to ask questions, but they're very systemic questions that he's asking. So I'm talking with him, but then he begins to ask a little bit more, and I'm telling you a little bit about, I'm a storyteller, so I'm telling, a little bit about stories and stuff. So he's beginning to ask questions. So I said, here, and this is an example of this. And then he asked something else, and I said, here, and here's an example of this. And then he asked another question, here's an example of this. So I'm giving him things, and he finally said at the end of it, he said, if I need a lawyer, I'm going to call you. Because I was answering all his questions. But after that, we became grand friends. And that meeting, I thought was going to be like a 45-minute meeting. I was there for like 4 hours. And I finally said, I got a long drive home. I got to go, because it's a long drive back to my house. But because he got engaged in a conversation about something innovative that he was trying to understand. And through that process, we worked together tremendously well. Standing tall and firm while not alienating others. And when you alienate somebody, backtread and figure out how to get them back in a conversation with you. So as you begin to do this, you'll begin to see what new realities are. So you'll begin to open doors to what new realities are. What we also did is we learned how to share services amongst different entities. Some people that we support are complicated, and early on it may have been too risky just to have one agency involved. So what we did is we shared stuff with other agencies. You do this, we'll do this. If we fall apart, you'll still be there. If you fall apart, we'll still be there. That sort of thing. So sharing things. And then the big thing was really how to introduce community people into people's lives. And largely we did that because a lot of people we support need 24-hour support, and there's no way I can go to government and ask for 24-hour paid support. So we needed to figure out another way to provide the right support, but not necessarily paid support. So new directions and dilemmas. So there's believers and disbelievers that you'll have along the way. So just know that. You're going to have people that are with you or not with you. But, you can sometimes get these disbelievers along with you. There's a lot of education and soul searching, and I would say, honestly, it is soul searching. It's the deep stuff that you're talking about. A lot of letting go of the old, embracing the new. You're going to be in uncharted waters because you may not know what you're doing, and you may not have somebody next door that knows what they're doing. Big piece is trying to let go of control, and we're getting better at that. It's taken us 22 years, but we're starting to get better at that. Giving control where it needs to be, not setting up so many boundaries, putting control on the right people. Multiple safeguards is incredibly important. There's safeguards all over the place. There's safeguards for the person, safeguards for the family, safeguards for the agency, safeguards for the bureaucracy. A lot of times we were held to budget, and that's okay. You hold me to budget, just at least I know what my parameters are. And then the interesting thing is if you're held to budget and budget's not enough, what do you do? And that's what taught us how to go to the community and find what resources are in the community that typically aren't available to people when they live or work in traditional programs. And so there's lots of benefits or whatever that potentially are in your community for people who are impoverished. And most of our people are impoverished. It doesn't have to do with an IQ score. It has to do with an income level. You know, and so what we were able to do is drag in a lot of those resources. And a key thing is learning to stay honest to people. And that's always a struggle, because you got lots of competing things going on, you know, with your organizations, but you've got to stay honest and true to people. Keep that compass heading for each person, or it's just not going to be. And then the right people, the right life, too. We talked a little bit about that before. This is just risks, you know, lots of different risks that you have to contend with. You know, the clienthood versus citizenship, you know, for people is a huge thing. You know, because all of our people are clients of services. Even the people that we're involved with, they are technically a client of a service. But yet, if we want people in citizenship roles, and that's what this whole conference has been about. It's not been about agencies and what agencies can do. It's been about real people, real community people, and what real community people can do. You know, so if we've seen that as example again and again and again, then what we need to do is think about how we can embrace community in a different way. So life sharing is about finding real people to have real friendships and real relationships, real lifestyle things going together. What I've found is that a lot of people, I started to say, is they go from being protector of somebody that they're involved with to being or protector or teacher, I should say, you know, to being a learner. It's interesting to watch this transition, you know, because if you match people well, and they enjoy each other's company, then eventually, you know, what'll happen is that they begin learning from each other. You know, I'll pick Anna and Joyce. You know, Joyce is a needy person. She needs a lot of support. And when Anna first moved in there, Anna thought, I can teach Joyce a lot. I can protect Joyce. I can do a lot of things for Joyce. But then when she's done a couple of presentations with me, and it was interesting listening to her through her own personal transition, and she's an unpaid person in Joyce's life. She was saying, Joyce is so smart. I mean, she's saying she takes her mother for a ride, you know, because her mother doesn't believe that Joyce can make choices, that, you know, Joyce, she sees her daughter as very disabled. You know, she was institutionalized early on, and mom's very elderly at this point, so she doesn't see a lot of vision for her daughter. But that's housemate just thinks that Joyce can make a million decisions. She does make a million decisions. And she's just learned so much from her. You know, so she's gone from that teacher protector to being more of an equal partner with her at this point. And when I talk about life sharing, what happens is we help people to find housemates, okay? People that we hope will be good people for them to live with, you know? It's kind of like when you went to college. You got a roommate, whatever you got, you know? And hopefully for that year, you live together okay. Our hope is it turns into a life-sharing role, you know, where you really share life, share relationship. And that doesn't happen when somebody first moves in. It just doesn't happen, you know, because they're still sorting out their relationship, you know. But eventually, and I can talk about quite a few people right now. Roger, for one, he's been there for 20 years. Richard's been with Mike probably 16 years. Anna's been with Joyce for probably 8 years. Ingrid's been with Sue, God, probably 12 years. I mean, those people are definitely in a life-sharing role at this point. And then when I see what happens when people are truly in the life-sharing roles, like this guy Ken, he was living with Ken and Carissa. And Ken and Carissa, a couple things happened. They went out to California on holiday, and they just took Ken with them. You know, they didn't call the agency and say, do we have permission? It's like they were living together. They just all flew to California for a week. Ken and Carissa also, their house was getting a little tight, so I thought maybe they would say Ken shouldn't live there any longer, but what they did instead, they sold their house and they bought a bigger house, and Ken moved in and got like a kind of an in-law apartment at the house. I mean, that's the power of people when they believe in each other. A housemate doesn't do that. okay? But when somebody begins to believe in somebody, that's what life sharing is all about, you know? And it's all the partnerships, friendships, shared, you know, heartaches, all of those sorts of things are just incredibly. And the biggest thing, and I have other DVDs I could show you or whatever, but one of the housemates said, it's just ordinary now. There's nothing special about what this is. It's just, we're just living ordinary life. And that's what we're hoping for people. You know, that people are just living ordinary life, nothing special, just ordinary life. So the outlook that's needed to stay focused is there's a common tendency to rationalize that the way things are today is the way things have to be. And it's not true. It's just a rationalization you're making. There's a tendency to also ask for permission, and there's a tendency to not think creatively. It's like, well, can we do this? I don't know. I've never asked. I just figured out what somebody did and said we're going to do it. You know, so you gotta be able to give yourself permission to do that. Common tendency to fit people into models or services versus driving the support that the person needs. Okay, a common tendency that there's a fine line between meeting the needs of the person and the needs of the agency. I mean, even with what we do, I'm constantly in battle with the government on something, or, I mean, there's so many competing stuff going on, and we try to keep that as far away from people as possible, but yet somebody has to pay attention to it, you know, because we're an organization. There's a willingness not to stay fixed on a particular model, and at our agency, we also wonder if we're not open-minded enough. You know, are we just another program type that we just can't think our way out of any longer? You know, because whenever you figure out whatever you do, and this is what we do, that we don't think about another way to do it. So we may be confining ourselves in ways that we don't even understand it. So that's the problem when you develop a certain model. You know, the answer becomes whatever that model is. So we could become just another model that's not thinking creatively. Yeah.
You went from a traditional model to this service you have now. Some people probably already had the sort of way of looking that suited the new way of operating, but for the people who didn't, who may not have had the range of skills needed to look differently, to think about relationships, to talk to people in the community, to do community development, what are the kind of range of things that you did for those people that stayed in the organisation to help them develop those skills?
Well, there's a lot. A lot of it's ongoing stuff. We do a lot of training, a lot of what I call values-based training. So everybody in our organization, I don't care if you're HR, business, secretary up front, everybody goes through it. We also, in terms of circles and planning meetings, I don't care if you're HR, I don't care who you are. You know, if somebody invites you to come, you will be part of those things. So there's a culture of, you know, you're going to be part and parcel to all this values infusion stuff that we have. We also, on a bi-weekly basis, we have what we call team meetings. And that's usually all the supervising staff that come together, coordinating staff, that sort of thing, with myself and the business people and that sort of thing. And those meetings are usually, there's no agenda, and usually we're sharing something good that happened in someone's life or whatever. Somebody got a new job, somebody got a new housemate, somebody had a baby, you know, whatever is happening. But we also use that to share dilemmas that we're trying to figure out and just, you know, open it up for greater discussion with people. We also use it because we get in conflict with different organizations because there's more traditional services in some people's lives. So how do we kind of work through some of the conflicts that we're having with different organizations and that sort of thing? We also use it for we got a new form, you know, but usually we're trying not to do the new form stuff that much. You know, so I think it's that combination of things. Plus, what we also do is we do a retreat annually. And the retreat annually is open to anybody who wants to come. And it's usually, it's always a values-based something, but it always has a different slant. Sometimes it's mission, sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's how to help people to have a more meaningful day. It's a variety of things. And what I've done is I've brought a variety of different facilitators in so they get a different, slant from different people. So we're not just a Michael Kendrick organization, or we're not just a John O'Brien organization or whatever, but we're an organization that knows all of these people because they've all been here. They all have worthwhile things to say, help us to think about, those sort of things.
So is it right to say that you mentioned before in some meetings you would just bring up a point or a different way of looking at things as a point for discussion rather than saying this is the way it should be? So is that a kind of way of thinking that you've introduced to the organisation as well, to have that space and time for just discussing different ways of looking at things?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was anything deliberately done in that way, but there's the staff that I supervise. Well, I do the business staff too, but it's the directorship of the different program types. We meet and we talk a lot, and it's very clear in our agency that I hold them accountable for what's going on in people's lives. So they don't do the direct service to people, but I hold them accountable for what people's lives are like. And so it's their job to mentor the staff that they're involved with. It's very clear that the mentorship is important. And that mentorship, I think, just the discussions in the hallways, it's all part of helping people to live better lives, And so I think we've got a culture that's been developed of people asking the right questions and challenging people in the right way. And because of that, I think it just happens on a day-by-day basis, And it was purposeful. It was purposeful because I'm very focused on training, And I actually do, not all the training in the agency, but I do quite a bit of the training in the agency. But we're very focused on what we want to train on. And then we're very focused on what we want to hold people accountable to. And so we've changed our job descriptions to focus more on what the outcomes are we're expecting for people. So all of that kind of ties in together. And once you start a systems change, you'll find your policies need to change, your job descriptions need to change, your training needs to change. It's just like a snowball sort of thing. And you'll feel what needs to change. Because the job descriptions we didn't never change. And then all of a sudden we're saying, we're not really holding people accountable in their evaluations for the right things any longer. And so that made us think about how to change things. So.
Just touching on your staffing structure. Mm-hmm. You just mentioned then that you're one of the coordinators, and the coordinators get together quite regularly to talk. Who comes next? You're coordinating staff who are allocated to people coming in to the service? Do you have support staff then as well? Is that how...
You want to see how our agency's set up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the executive director. We have a board of directors. And then we have, I'm going to call them directors, like a vocational director, a residential director. We have a college director, I'll say, for lack of a different term. And then we have something called service coordination, so there's like a director of that. So I supervise all those people, plus the business people. But those people all have staff that work for them, okay? So the residential is the most complicated. So the residential director supervises 6 coordinators. And those 6 coordinators have anywhere between 6 and 9 people that they're supporting. And then those 6 or 9 people all have their own support systems, and so that coordinator is responsible for all those different support systems. The vocational person has 3 full-time people that help people with job support. No, and then we have, God, I don't even know. We have a lot of part-time people for the volunteer support, so there's maybe 20 different part-timers for the volunteer support. And then the college person has, I don't even know, 9 people, part-time people for the college support. So.
What's the population, and if you've got all that staff, what's the population that you oversee?
The population, you mean how many staff do I oversee? Oh, I see. We're pretty much Onondaga County, and how do I want to say this? We have supported people, we still do. We support people outside of the county, but not very frequently. You know, so it just depends. There's other entities that do services outside of the county. So if a entity is, or if a family or a person is really not happy with whatever that entity is, we'll entertain coming into that county to provide support, but we try not to because we really don't want to infiltrate other counties.
So is your county our local government, is it?
The way our state is set up, I don't know how many, but our state is set up that there's different territories in our state. And each one of those territories are called a county. Now, so, but all I can say is that we're just a group of people. There's nothing special about us at all. You know, we're just a group of people that are trying to do something different and a bit better for people. And I bet you there's a group of people here, too, that could do exactly what we do. You know, you just got to decide if you want to do that. Because I don't think there's anything special about any of the people that we hire. I mean, they come with good values, I guess. But you can interview a lot of people that have good values, but then you put them into whatever your system is, and the system doesn't uphold their values, and they just turn into odd staff. You know, so, you know, I just think that you can do things anywhere. You can do things anywhere. I mean, you can do things in Victoria, you can do things in Tasmania, you can do things in Canada, you can do things. And what you find when you travel is that there are a lot of good things happening. The stories up here yesterday, there's a lot of good things happening. You know, but I'm sure there's a lot of not so good things happening too. You know, so you just got to decide which way you go. And the power you have, each one of you, is incredible. You know, you've just got to decide if you want to take it or not. I mean, it's just incredible. All you have to do is believe in somebody and work on what that person wants to do. That's all you need to do. You don't have to change a system to do that. You just have to be better at recognizing what that person needs and holding true to that. And that potentially will change the system. Thank you. Yep.
I'd like to thank Pat tremendously she's had a very long stint this morning, so thank you for your energy and commitment to both presentations in a row, and certainly in this presentation there's a richness of material there for us to think about, particularly those involved in working within agencies, but also people who are receiving services from agencies and how you might work with your agencies to transform to that one person at a time approach. So on behalf of the Belonging Matters Organising Committee, I'd like to just give you this small gift in recognition of your